just in 30 seconds, tell us what the ITU does.
So the ITU is the UN Agency for Digital Technologies. We've been around since 1865, from the telegraph to the telephone, to the television, to the internet, to artificial intelligence. We're all about radio communication standards and development, connecting the unconnected.
Yeah, it really is crazy that this began with the telegraph. So I guess let me start with this. Your organization has long been involved in bridging gaps of various sorts. When you think today of the fact that upwards of 2 billion people are not connected to the internet, what can an organization like yours do about that?
Well, so the ITU has actually a unique membership. So we have 194. We got a new member state last week, Palau. So we have our member states, but we also have private sector members. So we have 1,000+ private sector members, and we also have academic members, civil society, the technical community. And so through that platform, we can leverage partnerships, we can advance standards, we can decide on appropriate spectrum to be able to connect the hardest to connect. And that's our goal, to get to those 2.6 billion unconnected.
And what are the biggest hurdles there? Because for the better part of a decade or so, we've been seeing that there is this problem with last mile connectivity, even with spectrum, even with mobile internet. If you look at much of Africa, much of Asia, people have gotten online through smartphones. What are the hurdles that you're struggling with?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost is putting in that right regulatory policy framework that will be predictable and attract the needed investment. The second piece, of course, is the investment. We did some estimates some years ago where we said that it would take $428 billion to connect the unconnected. We actually think that that number is probably much higher, and so is the investment piece. The other piece is affordability. So if we have succeeded in covering the world with a mobile signal, why do we still have 2.6 billion unconnected? A lot of that has to do with skill building, digital literacy, has to do with content, lack of relevant content, but it also has to do with the cost of the device. So we need to be very focused on that device cost as well. And of course, safety and security. With online threats increasing, there are growing concerns around cybersecurity where people are intentionally deciding not to connect.
So it seems to me one thing that connects all of this, as well as everything else we're going to discuss here today, is digital literacy. If people aren't equipped with the how of using their equipment safely, of being, online citizens who understand how the internet works, and understand how to deal with threats, we're in trouble. And we've seen this with elections in the past. There's a lot to worry about. How are you thinking about bridging the digital literacy gap?
Yeah, the digital literacy piece is a huge one, and we have to address it. So we have many different programs. We have a big focus on child online protection together with UNICEF. We also have our GIGA initiative with UNICEF. It's ambitious. We seek to connect every school in the world to the internet by 2030. Half of the world's schools are not connected, so when it comes to digital literacy, obviously there's a big gap right there in the fact that those schools are not connected. Of course, we work closely with UNESCO as well. We have different initiatives. We have a big digital transformation center in Ghana that focuses on that basic digital literacy.
And what kind of funding do you need to make this happen? I mean, it strikes me that we're talking about, crazy amounts of money for last mile connectivity in villages that have tiny schools.
Yeah. Well, it's going to take it's going to take a multi-stakeholder approach. I have to say that because it's not going to be the governments alone. It's not going to be the development banks alone. We really do need to pull together. We have our Partner to Connect platform that seeks to raise $100 billion in commitments by the end of 2026. So far, we have $51 billion that's been mobilized in commitments and pledges, and the focus is to get to the hardest to connect.
So let's get to AI, because I feel like every discussion ends up there, especially in a week like this one. When I think about tech regulation in the last decade, I think everyone could now admit that we got some things wrong, that we weren't able to properly regulate, especially big tech, to make sure certain standards were in place to ensure election integrity and the likes. If we didn't get regulation right in Web 1.0 and 2.0, how do we get it right this time with AI?
Yeah. I feel like every discussion I've been in the past week here in New York is about AI, because we do have to find a way to get it right. And as you said in your opening, the challenge is technology, AI is moving so fast. And how can we structure a policy response that can keep up with AI? I don't think that's going to happen. So we have to put in place something where we're managing the risks and the security and the privacy, but we're not stifling that innovation. We have our AI for Good platform, something that we started back in 2017, pre-generative AI. And what we're trying to do through that platform is really focus on how can we leverage AI to achieve the SDGs, and what kinds of standards development processes can we put in place. We have a collaboration with IEC ISO, where we're very focused on deepfakes, multimedia authentication, and trying to advance that response together.
So I mentioned very optimistically in my opening remarks that this is an area where the United States and China actually are willing to talk to each other. Can you give us a sense of how that works behind the scenes?
Well, we have the high-level advisory body report that just came out, the UNSG's report, and the Global Digital Compact. And I think there are good elements to build upon. What we're seeing is that the concentration of AI discussions, as the report cites, is really focused on 7 countries, of course, including the US and China. A big focus on mitigating the risks, big focus on looking at the compute gaps, and of course, a big focus on the capacity development. And as you said, there may not be a lot of things that the world agrees on these days, but I think everyone agrees that digital technologies can be life-changing, but we need to get it right. And the SG said yesterday, when he opened the high-level debate, is that we need to make sure that we come together and make sure that AI is a force for good and not for bad.
So I have a tricky question for you now, moving on from the China aspect of this. There's a phrase that is increasingly becoming vogue in foreign policy, and that's sort of a global axis of evil. I hate the phrase. I hated axis of evil when it was first sort of rolled out during the Iraq War. But anyway, there's a loose alliance of autocracies of sorts. There's China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and they tend to pop up in various disputes around the world. That's obviously not your domain, but I'm curious how, when I mentioned that stuff like that paralyzes many other discussions when it comes to ending conflicts, how does it not paralyze the discussions you're in that are around tech or AI? And how do you trust each other?
Yeah, well, I think globally there is a deficit when it comes to trust. But I think fortunately in the ITU, we like to say that we're consensus-based. We focus on radio communications, for example, our spectrum focus. So we're looking at the future of 6G. And in those discussions, all players come to the table, whether they're from China, whether they're from the US, whether they're from Europe, and they have to come to agreement on the right technical standards, the right spectrum allocations in order to make technology work. I don't think we can afford today to have 2 technology spaces and to have a complete fragmentation and have 2 internets. And so the ITU is a great platform to bring those stakeholders together, be it in standards discussions, spectrum discussions, or global development discussions with policymakers and regulators.
So the other big area this week that everyone's hoping there is some cooperation around that we can get behind in the lead up to COP29 is climate change, of course. And there's a growing sense that tech eats up a lot of energy. AI and sort of the precursors behind it, semiconductors, a lot of energy goes into that. Is that in contradiction with the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, AI is thirsty when we think about water consumption and also, of course, the energy demand. But what we have also seen is that AI can be used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions anywhere from 5 to 10%. We're also very focused on electronic waste. And believe it or not, only 20% of electronic waste gets recycled. And so that's a growing concern when we think about sustainability. We've put together something called the Green Digital Action Coalition, and so we're gearing up for COP29. This will be the first digital ministerial that will take place in the context of a COP. So big focus on digital, trying to bring partners together to look at what we can do to advance green digital.
Honestly, I really hope you succeed. I'm afraid we're out of time. For the audience here, I will be back in a bit, but let's hear it for Doreen Bogdan-Martin of the ITU.
Thank you.